Tuscan Affair. In the rolling hills of Tuscany, where the sun bathes the landscape in golden light, Isabella Rossi spent her summers. At 28, she was a writer who sought inspiration in the quiet beauty of the countryside. Her family owned a vineyard just outside of Siena, a sprawling estate surrounded by rows of olive trees and grapevines. It was a place of peace, far from the chaos of the city. Yet, this summer, something different was in the air. An unexpected guest would soon arrive and turn her world upside down. One late afternoon, as Isabella sat on the terrace, typing on her laptop, she noticed a car approaching the house. Her mother, Maria, stepped out onto the patio and called to her. "Isabella, I forgot to mention we'll be hosting a guest for a while. He's here now." Isabella, somewhat surprised, looked up from her work. "A guest? Who?" Her mother smiled mysteriously. "An old friend of your father's. He's here to learn about winemaking." Curiosity piqued, Isabella closed her laptop and walked down the steps just as the guest stepped out of the car. He was tall, with dark hair and the kind of effortless charm that seemed to belong to someone well-versed in travel and adventure. He wore a light linen shirt, and his smile was warm. "Luca Benedetti," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Isabella Rossi," she replied, shaking his hand. "Welcome to our vineyard." Over the next few days, Isabella learned more about Luca. He was 32, an architect from Florence, taking a sabbatical to explore new interests, and Tuscany had always fascinated him. He had known Isabella's father, a retired architect, and now wanted to try his hand at something more grounded: winemaking. "I've always admired the patience and craftsmanship behind creating wine," Luca told Isabella one evening as they walked through the vineyard. The golden sunset lit up the grapes, casting long shadows across the fields. "It's so different from my world, where everything is fast-paced." Isabella found herself drawn to Luca's easy conversation. She had always been focused on her writing, her novels set in distant lands and times. But this summer, the world of winemaking suddenly seemed more captivating. She offered to show him the ropes, taking him through the vineyard and explaining the intricacies of grape cultivation and harvest timing. As the days passed, their conversations grew deeper. Luca wasn't just interested in the mechanics of winemaking. He seemed fascinated by everything around him: nature, art, philosophy. He and Isabella would sit on the terrace after dinner, sipping wine and discussing the meaning of life, happiness, and fulfillment. One night, after a long day of work in the vineyard, Isabella and Luca decided to visit a nearby town for the annual Tuscan Harvest Festival. The small village square was alive with music, laughter, and the rich smell of food. Lanterns hung from the buildings, and the sound of traditional Italian folk songs filled the air. As they wandered through the festival, Luca stopped in front of a stall selling handmade jewelry. He picked up a delicate silver bracelet and turned to Isabella. "This would look perfect on you," he said with a smile, and without hesitation, he bought it for her. Isabella blushed, surprised by the gesture. She had always been cautious with her feelings, preferring the safety of her solitary world of writing. But there was something about Luca that disarmed her. His presence was calming yet exciting, and she found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. Later that night, they danced under the stars in the square. The music was lively, and the rhythm of the waltz carried them across the cobblestones. Isabella couldn't remember the last time she had felt so free. The worries of her work, her deadlines, and her usual anxieties melted away in Luca's arms. As the night wore on, their steps slowed, and they eventually found themselves standing at the edge of the square, looking out at the moonlit hills. "Isabella," Luca said softly, turning to face her, "I've traveled to many places, met many people, but there's something different about being here with you. I feel like I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She had spent so much of her life focused on her career, on her writing, that she hadn't allowed herself to think about love, about what she wanted beyond her work. But now, standing here in the soft glow of the Tuscan night, she realized that Luca had quietly slipped into her heart. "I feel the same," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant music. "I didn't expect this, but maybe that's the best part." They stood there for a moment, the world around them fading into the background. It was just the two of them under the stars, with the whole of Tuscany as their witness. The days that followed were a blur of happiness. Isabella and Luca spent their time exploring the countryside, visiting nearby villages, and continuing their work in the vineyard. The summer heat began to give way to the cool breezes of autumn, and the grape harvest was approaching. Together, they worked alongside Isabella's family to gather the grapes, turning them into the first batch of wine Luca had ever helped produce. One evening, as they stood in the wine cellar, watching the fermentation process begin, Luca turned to Isabella. "I've been thinking about staying here at least for a while. There's so much more I want to learn, and—" He paused, looking at her with those dark, sincere eyes. "I don't want to leave you." Isabella smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "Then stay," she said simply. "Stay as long as you want." And so Luca did. The summer that began as an unexpected visit turned into something much more. A journey of discovery, love, and the quiet joy of finding where you truly belong. For Isabella, Tuscany would always be her home. But now it was also the place where her heart found its match. As the last rays of the setting sun bathed the vineyard in golden light, Isabella and Luca stood side by side, watching the fruits of their labor grow into something beautiful, just like their love.
Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, and share our channel Magic Mingle with your friends to enjoy more magical stories.